Previously on the Silent Disruptor, Jonah Vance discovered he'd been flagged by a federal profiling program years before Echo ever existed, reactivated the moment his network became too large to ignore. A whistleblower inside the Directorate for Market Continuity was reassigned within 48 hours of talking to journalist Layla Anwar. The story broke anyway. Director Helena Cade came back without an apology. She designated Echo a critical private infrastructure provider under a classified resilience framework and gave Jonah 30 days to accept a mandatory cooperation framework or lose the legal status that lets Echo operate across state lines at all. 26 days remain. This is the episode where the fight stops happening behind closed doors, and Jonah Vance stops being able to stay out of the spotlight he spent 3 years trying to avoid. 26 days before the deadline, a classified draft order leaks. It would require Echo to embed a permanent, undisclosed monitoring capability inside its own network architecture, reachable by the government at any time, invisible to the 26,000 ordinary people running it. The government isn't trying to shut Echo down anymore. It's trying to own it from the inside, quietly, without ever having to explain why. The full text of the Directorate's cooperation framework finally arrives, and it's worse than anyone expected. A permanent, hidden monitoring capability embedded directly in Echo's node architecture. The document ran 60 pages, but the operative clause fit in one paragraph. Echo would embed a persistent access capability into its core consensus protocol, disclosed to no user, invisible in every public audit, activatable by the Directorate without notice to Echo's own engineers. Nia read that paragraph out loud once, slowly, then set the document down like it had gotten heavier while she was reading it. "This isn't oversight," she said. "This is asking us to build the exact thing we spent 3 years proving nobody needed to build." Arthur, now speaking with none of his old institutional caution, calls the order exactly what it is: a mass surveillance backdoor dressed in the language of resilience planning. Arthur had spent 30 years inside institutions that were very careful about which words they let into official documents. He wasn't careful anymore. "Call it what it is," he told them over the video call. "This isn't continuity planning. This is asking you to install a permanent surveillance backdoor into the financial lives of 26,000 Americans, and to lie to every one of them about it by omission every single day it's active." Nobody on the call disagreed with him. Nobody needed to. Jonah won't sign the order as written, but recognizes an outright public refusal with 26 days left could hand the Directorate the excuse it needs to shut Echo down entirely. He wasn't going to sign it. He also wasn't ready to say so publicly, not yet, not with 26 days on a clock built specifically to punish anyone who took time to think. "If I refuse loudly right now," he told Nia, "they get to be the reasonable ones asking a stubborn kid to cooperate on national security. I need a way to refuse that isn't just refusing." Nia had been waiting 3 weeks for him to ask that question. She already had an answer half-built. Nia proposes a technical alternative, a fully public, cryptographically audited emergency alert layer that could flag systemic risk to regulators without ever exposing individual user identities. Nia had spent 3 weeks building an answer to a question nobody had asked her yet. Her proposal was simple to say and brutal to build: an alert layer that could flag genuine systemic risk patterns, the kind that precede real flash crashes, to regulators in real time, with every query and every alert published openly, auditable by anyone, incapable of resolving to a single person's identity even if the Directorate itself demanded it. "We give them the thing they claim to actually need," she said. "We just don't give them the thing they didn't admit they wanted." Before taking the compromise public, Jonah calls Margaret Ilves directly, the retired teacher whose porch visit started the human stakes of the season, to ask whether the design would have protected her. Jonah had never spoken to Margaret Ilves directly before that call. He explained Nia's design in plain language, the same way he'd once explained Echo itself to a library table. Would a system like this, he asked her, ever have let 2 strangers show up at her door with her real address in hand? She thought about it for a long moment. "If nobody can turn my number into my name without everybody seeing them try," she said, "then no, I don't think they'd have come." Jonah wrote her sentence down word for word. Jonah's team formally submits the audited alert layer as a counterproposal. Kate studies it with more genuine interest than anyone at Echo expected, revealing her motives are more complicated than pure control. Cade read the counterproposal twice in one sitting, which her staff would later say was unusual for her. It solved the actual problem her office had been founded to prevent: undetected systemic risk cascading through decentralized infrastructure, without giving her office the identity-level access it had quietly wanted for 30 years. She sat with that tension for a long moment. "This is a serious piece of engineering," she finally said to an aide. "It's also going to make several people upstairs very unhappy that it exists." Someone inside the Directorate leaks the existence of the original backdoor demand to a competing outlet, distorted and stripped of context, forcing Jonah into his first public statement of the season. A competing outlet ran the leaked draft order without the counterproposal attached, under a headline implying Echo had already agreed to build the government a backdoor. It was wrong, and it was everywhere within 2 hours. Jonah's publicist, a role that hadn't existed at Echo 18 months earlier, told him he had to say something on camera before lunch. Jonah, who had spent 3 years being the person who explained Echo to one person at a time, was about to have to explain it to everyone at once. Jonah holds his first solo press conference, correcting the record and publicly revealing the audited alert layer as Echo's actual counterproposal, turning a defensive moment into a value statement. He didn't use notes. He corrected the false headline in one sentence, then spent 4 minutes explaining, in the same plain language he'd used on a witness stand 2 years earlier, what Nia had actually built. A system that could warn regulators about real danger without ever being able to identify a single person doing nothing wrong. "We are not the network that watches you quietly," he said. "We built the one that tells you, loudly, the moment anyone tries." It ran on every financial news channel that had ignored Echo for 3 straight years. Marcus Sterling, watching Jonah's press conference from his office, realizes the boy he once tried to sue out of existence has become someone the public trusts more than his own industry. Marcus Sterling watched the press conference alone, having sent his assistant out on an unnecessary errand so no one would see his face while he did it. He had spent 18 months trying to make Jonah Vance look like a reckless amateur who'd built something dangerous. He was watching, instead, a 20-year-old the cameras trusted more in 4 minutes than his own industry had earned in 4 decades. He turned the television off before the segment ended. He didn't turn it off out of anger. He turned it off because he recognized, for the first time, that he might be watching the losing side of history. Margaret Ilves agrees to a short interview with Layla, becoming an unexpected and powerful public voice for exactly the kind of ordinary user the entire fight is meant to protect. She had never wanted to be on camera in her life. She agreed anyway, because 31 years of teaching 4th grade had taught her that some lessons only land when a real person explains them. "I'm not a technology person," she told Layla, sitting in her own living room. "I'm a person who wanted a fair price on her retirement, and instead I got a knock on my door from people who wouldn't tell me who they worked for. If a system can stop that from happening to somebody else's grandmother, I don't understand why anyone would fight it this hard." Congressional offices begin fielding calls after Margaret's interview goes viral. Cade is summoned to brief oversight staff on the draft order for the first time since it was written. Cade's office had operated for years without a single congressional staffer asking a direct question about it. That changed within 72 hours of a retired schoolteacher's interview clearing 4 million views. She was summoned to brief 2 oversight committees, an experience her deputy later described as the first time in a decade anyone up there remembered we existed. Cade prepared for the briefing the way she prepared for everything, precisely, and without revealing more than the question in front of her required. A genuine, small-scale flash crash-style anomaly begins forming in real market data, not large enough to cause harm yet, but exactly the kind of pattern Cade's office claims justifies its demands. It started as a strange clustering pattern across a handful of thinly traded stocks, the same fingerprint, in miniature, of the flash crash that had once wiped out Elaine Vance's retirement account. It wasn't large enough to hurt anyone yet. It was exactly large enough to matter. Nia flagged it to Jonah at 9 p.m. with 4 words. "This is the test." Not a test anyone had designed. The kind that shows up on its own at the worst possible moment, to prove whether a compromise built in theory actually works under real pressure. Jonah and Nia activate the still unofficial audited alert layer for the first time under real conditions, publicly flagging the anomaly to regulators without identifying a single user. They hadn't planned to activate it this soon, and they didn't wait for anyone's permission to try. Nia pushed the anomaly through the alert layer exactly as designed, a public, time-stamped, cryptographically signed notice to every registered market regulator, describing the pattern in full without resolving to a single account or address. It took 90 seconds. It was, Jonah realized watching the log populate in real time, the first moment their compromise had ever done anything except exist on paper. Cade's own systems receive Echo's public alert before her office's traditional channels catch the anomaly at all, proof, in the middle of a live event, that the compromise functions. Cade's office received Echo's public alert 4 minutes before her own traditional monitoring systems flagged the same anomaly through channels that had taken 30 years and untold budget to build. She read the alert twice, the way she'd read the counterproposal twice days earlier, and said nothing to the room around her for a long moment. Her deputy finally asked what she wanted to do. "Nothing for now," she said. "Let's see if it actually works before I decide how much I resent that it might." Regulators, alerted early by Echo's system, intervene in time to prevent the anomaly from cascading into an actual flash crash, the first tangible proof the compromise can genuinely protect people. By 6 a.m., 2 exchanges had quietly paused trading on the affected tickers long enough to identify and correct the algorithmic error causing the clustering. No headlines called it a crisis, because it never became one. Which was, Jonah understood watching the resolution report come through, exactly what success was supposed to look like. Somewhere in Ohio, an account belonging to someone he would never meet had been protected by a system built specifically not to know that person's name. Cade returns one final time before the deadline, agreeing to consider the audited alert layer as a pilot substitute for the original backdoor demand, but warns that a larger, unrelated crisis may make the whole compromise moot. Cade told them what last night had proven was enough to justify recommending the audited alert layer as a formal pilot, in place of the original demand, pending review above her own authority to grant a loan. It should have felt like victory. It didn't, entirely, because of the last thing she said before she left. "I'd enjoy this more," she told Jonah, "if I weren't fairly confident something considerably larger than a clustering anomaly is building somewhere in this system right now." When it arrives, I don't think either of us gets to choose how careful we're allowed to be. She didn't explain further. She didn't need to. For 4 days, Echo had something it hadn't had all season, a version of winning nobody had to apologize for. A retired teacher's fear had turned into a public voice. A director's demand had turned into a pilot program built on transparency instead of secrecy. And underneath all of it, a warning nobody had asked to hear, about something larger than a clustering anomaly, building somewhere in a system built to survive almost anything, except, perhaps, whatever was coming next. Next time, on the Silent Disruptor, the season finale, the crisis Cade warned about arrives, bigger than anyone at Echo has ever faced, and Jonah has to decide, in real time, what protecting people is actually supposed to mean.